I saw this many years ago in a book by Rav Pesach Krohn. I'm not sure which one of his early ones for sure. It must have been 20, 30 years ago. And he brings down a story of a woman by the name of Mrs. Lerman. She was working in Eretz Yisrael in Ramat Gan. And the times in Eretz Yisrael, it's always like this, but at this particular time, financially, it was very difficult in Eretz Yisrael. So even people with jobs would have a hard time, paying bills. It was hard. It's not like the biggest salaries they get, and also, like I said, financial difficulty. This woman had an extra burden. What was the extra burden? She was expecting a baby. Her baby was due in 3 months, and her husband was out of work already for 6 months. But to top it all off, his brother was living with them also, a younger brother that also was looking for a job. So there was a lot of expenses in the home, even though it was her first child. But like I said, they weren't making enough. They weren't making ends meet. And what was she worried about? She was worried that after her pregnancy, she would want to stay with the child for a few months, and obviously not go to work for X amount of months. And she was worried she'd be replaced. So this was a concern that she had. One afternoon, Mr. Fleischer, who was the owner of this particular company, an Orthodox Yid that was working, the owner of the company that Mrs. Lerman was working in, decided to make a lunch for the employees, a nice lunch for the employees, and to hear about them, to hear where they're coming from, to hear their histories a little bit, because he didn't know much about it. It's almost like a staff appreciation day. And Mrs. Lerner obviously she was invited, she was there. And during the course of conversation, she mentioned to Mr. Fleischer, her boss, that obviously she's due a few months, and she's worried about her job. She's worried if she's going to keep her job. Mr. Fleischer didn't want to commit. He didn't know what to tell her. She's needed. So he sidestepped the topic and he went on to other things. Finally, he asked each person where they're from. And Mrs. Lerman, it was her turn. She said, "I'm from East Flatbush." All of a sudden, Mr. Fleischer, when he heard this, something, jolted his memory and rang a bell in his memory. And he said, "From East Flatbush? What was your grandfather's name? What was your grandmother's name? Where did they daven?" He started to ask personal questions. And she answered him. He took his leave of his seat, went outside, came back 5-10 minutes later, and it was seen on his face that he was crying. And then he tells the whole group of people that were his workers why he went out to cry and why he was asking such questions. He said over a story like this. He says, "When I was a little boy growing up in East Flatbush, there were 2 electricians that lived on the block that he lived on. One was his father, and one was a very big veer, a big electrician. But this electrician, the big veer, actually made a lot of money because he was part of the union. Part of the union means you have a degree, you're part of a system. It's not just somebody that works on his own. Part of the union, you make a lot more, and therefore people take you for bigger jobs. So even though her father, this boy said, Mr. Fleischer said, "My father was an electrician, but he didn't make nearly as much as this other electrician." But they were friendly with each other. They were nice. They didn't know each other well, but they would always meet each other on the way to shul. They would walk home together a little bit. But, that was the closest they got. But they knew each other. They knew each other from shul. A few years after his bar mitzvah, Mr. Fleischer says, his father died from a heart attack. The one that wasn't the union, the one that did not have as much money, died from a heart attack. And during the shiva, all the different electricians, many people came, but other different electricians that knew about him, knew about the nifter, came to be Menachem Mavel, for the shiva. And this particular union electrician asked, my mother, how is she doing? How is she financially doing? And she said, she'll make it through. And he went into the kitchen and he saw there was very little food in the fridge. He saw there was little food in the house. And he decided he's going to take control. And what did he do? He made sure that the whole week during Shiva, that there was filled food. And he arranged a little bit that people would also get involved a little bit afterwards. And that Karsatay, he felt, wow, very special what this electrician did, this union electrician did. But to go one step further, his mother called this union electrician and told him like this one day. He said, I have all these electrical supplies in my garage. I have so many different wirings and tools and sheds and so much different, I don't even know, so many different things that an electrician needs. She has no need for it anymore. And she feels bad, she needs the money. Can this electrician, maybe buy it off of her because he's so big, maybe buy it off her for a few $100s, which I guess was a little money at the time, nothing major. So the electrician said, let me come by. And for the next 2 weeks, this electrician went and he took care of everything in the garage. He put things in order, he made Seder. Every night he would come for an hour or two and he would make almost like a store out of it. And one day he told all the electricians that there will be a big sale. There will be a big sale on a Sunday and we're going to sell the items. And they sold the items for a few $1,000s. A few $1,000s, and he gave the check to my mother. This union electrician gave the check to my mother. And then he said, and I wanted Mrs. Lerman to know that her grandfather was the one, that union electrician, that came to my mother's aid. Came to my mother's aid when she needed it most. And then he turns to Mrs. Lerman and says, not only are you going to have a job here after you have your baby, but I want to hire your husband and his brother for a job too. So you see, when you do a chesed, Shlomo Melech says, "Hashlech alamayim lach mecha." Throw your bread, throw your breads onto the water, because one day it's going to return to you. One day in Koheles, he says, which means what? That you throw your bread, almost like you throw a bottle with a note in it, and then it comes back one day with a note, or it comes back to you somehow. Throw your breads onto the water, and one day it's going to come, which means you never know what chesed a person does that comes back to help him out in the future.